Okay, so you want to talk intermittent fasting, huh?
Yes.
And not just the surface stuff. You want to dive deep into the how and why.
Yeah, the really fascinating thing about what you sent over, the research and everything, it's not just about what you eat, it's about that timing aspect and how that might actually impact how long we live. Like literally impacting our lifespan.
Well, okay, so we're talking cellular level stuff here.
Yeah, absolutely. You sent over some like seriously in-depth research papers on this, even a whole manual dedicated to fasting.
Color me intrigued because honestly, when I hear extend lifespan, I need a little more convincing than just eat less.
Oh, absolutely. And your research gets into that. So basically, and bear with me, it gets a little sciencey here, but
Hit me with it.
okay, so basically when we fast, it triggers certain pathways in our cells to activate. And these pathways, think of them like little repair crews.
Okay.
They go in, they clean up cellular damage, protect against stress, and all that stress really contributes to aging.
So it's like instead of constantly digesting, our body can focus on like a little internal maintenance.
Exactly. And some pretty incredible research, some of it on animals, suggests this cellular rejuvenation could mean a longer lifespan. Now, translating that to humans, still a work in progress, but, definitely interesting stuff.
Okay, so that's the long game.
Yeah.
But let's be real. A lot of people are initially interested in intermittent fasting for like the more immediate benefits, right? Weight loss, more energy. Did your research touch on that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because those short-term benefits your sources suggest, they could actually be linked to those cellular changes we talked about.
Really?
Yeah, like there were studies that found that even with minimal weight loss from fasting, people saw positive changes in things like their cholesterol levels and their blood sugar regulation, which is huge for overall metabolic health.
So it's not just about fitting into your skinny jeans. It's about like improving how our bodies process energy on a fundamental level.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us to the different types of intermittent fasting that your research talks about, because it's not one size fits all.
Right, right. And I'm seeing like alternate day fasting, the 5.2 diet.
Uh-huh.
What's the deal with all these different approaches?
Yeah, so let's start with alternate day fasting, or ADF, because that seems to pop up quite a bit in the research. One study talked about participants who fasted completely every other day, and then on their eating days, they didn't restrict calories at all. And get this, within weeks, significant weight loss and improvement in insulin sensitivity.
Fasting every other day, though, that's intense. That takes serious dedication. What if you're like me and just thinking about skipping a meal makes you hangry?
Well, that's where the 5.2 diet might be more your speed. It's less about the daily grind and more about a weekly cycle. So 2 days out of the week, you really restrict your calories, usually to around 500 to 700. And then the other 5 days, you eat normally, focusing on healthy choices, of course.
Okay, so a little more flexibility there. But what about people who, like me, we get hungry?
Yeah.
Like really hungry. Is there an option for us?
There is. It's called time-restricted eating, or TRE. And this one focuses on when you eat, not necessarily what you eat.
Oh.
So the most common approach is the 16-8 method. You fast for 16 hours each day, and then you eat all of your calories within an 8-hour window.
So essentially you're just like having a later breakfast and an earlier dinner.
Exactly.
Okay, that even I can do.
I think.
And
And the important thing that your sources highlight is that no matter which method you choose, consistency is key, especially if you're looking for those long-term benefits, that cellular health, longevity.
consistency is key. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, I have to ask about something I saw in one of your sources, the fasting manual you sent over. It mentioned Jasper Frog makes ways exercise for dealing with hunger.
Yeah,
That's a choice.
that definitely caught my eye too. The name's a little out there, but the actual concept is pretty interesting. So it involves using certain breathing patterns and muscle contractions to distract from those hunger pangs, and it basically retrains your body's response to hunger cues.
So you're telling your stomach to chill out, we're not eating right now. Almost like meditating on your hunger.
That's a great way to put it. And actually, your sources talk about that a lot, the importance of mindfulness during a fast.
Interesting. So we're all about being mindful of what we eat, but maybe we also need to be mindful of how we don't eat.
Right, exactly. It's all connected.
Speaking of connected, let's talk about the relationship between fasting and, well, sleep. Because let's be real, a good night's sleep is essential whether we're fasting or feasting, am I right?
100%. And your sources highlight this interconnectedness. It's not just about the food, it's about a holistic approach to well-being. And actually, one study found that combining intermittent fasting with consistent sleep patterns actually boosted the positive effects on insulin sensitivity, even reduced markers of inflammation.
So good sleep, that's like our secret weapon for maximizing the benefits of fasting.
Exactly. And while we're on the subject of supporting our bodies, managing stress, that's another piece of the puzzle, especially when it comes to fasting.
Right, because if you're already asking your body to adjust to this new eating pattern, throwing a bunch of stress hormones into the mix is probably not ideal.
Exactly. And your research dives into some cool stuff about the interplay between stress, hormones, and like our overall metabolic health.
All right, break it down for me. What's the connection there between stress and our metabolism, especially when we're fasting?
Okay, so one study found that people who practiced mindfulness meditation while they were fasting, they were able to manage their cortisol levels, which is that key stress hormone. And cortisol, when it's chronically high, it can really mess with our
So
metabolism.
it's not just about the food, it's about our mental and emotional state too. It's all
Yeah,
connected.
you got it. It's about creating this supportive environment for our bodies to thrive.
Makes total sense. And speaking of support, what about physical activity? Can we still hit the gym on an empty stomach? Because, full disclosure, I need my pre-workout snack or I become a monster.
Oh, I hear you on that one.
Yeah.
But actually, a lot of your research suggested that moderate exercise can actually be really beneficial when paired with fasting.
Wait, really?
Yeah, there were studies that found that exercising in a fasted state could actually lead to better fat burning and improved insulin sensitivity, even more so than fasting alone.
So are you saying that instead of reaching for that pre-workout snack, I should be reaching for my running shoes?
Essentially, yeah. But big caveat, listen to your body. Don't push yourself too hard, especially when you're just starting out.
Okay, that's reassuring. I don't think I'm ready to ditch my pre-workout routine entirely, but maybe a light jog on an empty stomach wouldn't be so bad.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for you. Now, before we move on, I think it's important to talk about something your sources highlighted, especially that health and weight program you sent over. They really emphasize the importance of personalized guidance when it comes to like the practical side of intermittent fasting, actually doing it.
Personalized guidance, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're all snowflakes, right? Or at least our bodies are.
Hmm?
So this is where that health and weight program comes in, the one
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's like a really good example of a structured and supportive way to approach intermittent fasting. And one thing that stood out to me was that they emphasize easing into and out of a fast instead of just like going cold turkey.
Okay, yeah, I imagine our bodies probably appreciate a heads up.
Yeah.
So what kind of guidance do they give for those transitions?
So it gets pretty specific, which some people might find helpful. For example, they recommend starting with a gallbladder flush before you even start fasting.
Okay.
It involves like using a solution of magnesium sulfate to stimulate bile production, kind of like clearing the decks, digestively speaking.
Interesting. I've heard of gallbladder flushes, but I always thought those were more for like detox programs. Is that common for fasting?
It's not the norm, to be honest. And it's actually interesting because your sources don't all agree on this. Like the research papers you sent, they're more focused on like the scientific mechanisms, the benefits, that kind of thing. Whereas this manual, it seems to take more of a, I don't know, a holistic approach.
Hmm.
Some might even say unconventional.
Fair enough, fair enough. So gallbladder flush aside, what else do they suggest for a smooth transition into fasting?
Well, they also recommend, and this one might surprise you, incorporating enemas during the first few days of the fast.
Okay, yeah, enemas aren't usually my go-to health tip. What's the thinking there?
So their logic, as I understand it, is that it helps to further cleanse the digestive tract, minimizing any discomfort or like potential toxins being reabsorbed while you're fasting. But again, not something that's universally endorsed by the research you shared.
Got it. More of a program-specific recommendation, not a general fasting must-do. So
Yeah.
what about breaking a fast? Because I imagine that also requires some, like, careful consideration.
Absolutely, yeah. The health and weight program, they really emphasize this gradual reintroduction of food. So starting with small amounts and slowly increasing your calorie intake over a few days. The idea is to avoid overwhelming your system after it's had a break.
Right, makes sense. Like easing back into a workout routine after some time off. You wouldn't go from 0 to 100 overnight.
Exactly. And they really emphasize nutrient-dense foods, especially during those first few days, just to kind of give your body what it needs to recover.
So that's good to hear. I was picturing, like, a diet of saltines and broth. So real food is a win.
No bland food here.
Mm.
Now, switching gears a bit, one thing that your sources touched on and the health and weight program really delves into is the mental aspect of fasting, because it's not always easy to power through those, those hunger pangs.
Oh, tell me about it. I've had my fair share of hangry moments. And it's not even always about physical hunger. Sometimes it's just about breaking those habits. Like we're so used to eating at certain times.
Exactly, and the program acknowledges that. They talk a lot about mindfulness techniques, paying attention to those hunger cues, differentiating between actual physical hunger versus like emotional cravings. They even have the specific exercises like that Jasper Frog technique we talked about.
Right, the breathing and muscle contraction thing.
Yeah.
I have to admit, as out there as it sounds, I'm kind of curious to try it now.
Yeah, I'm a little intrigued myself, not gonna lie. But beyond the specific techniques, they also really emphasize having a support system, like
Mm.
connecting with other people who are also practicing intermittent fasting, whether it's friends, family, or even like online communities.
Yeah, the community aspect can make a big difference. Sharing tips, recipes, or even just like commiserating on the tough days.
Absolutely, yeah. Knowing you're not alone in something, it really does help. And this was something that all of your sources really emphasized, the importance of support, whether it's from friends, family, online communities, or even working with a qualified healthcare professional.
It all goes back to that holistic approach, right? It's not just about the food, it's about all these other factors that play into our well-being.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that your sources suggest this might be bigger than just a trend. Like intermittent fasting could be a catalyst for a larger shift in how we think about health and longevity.
Okay, I like where this is going. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves and dive back into the science, I think there's an important question we need to address, especially for our listeners. Are there downsides?
Hmm.
Risks to be aware of with intermittent fasting? That's the million-dollar question, right? We've talked about the potential upsides, but like anything, got to look at both sides.
For sure. And your sources acknowledge that, intermittent fasting, it isn't for everyone. Like any lifestyle change, there can be downsides.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? What kind of risks?
Well, some common side effects, especially in the beginning, are things like headaches, fatigue, even a little brain fog. It's like your body's adjusting.
A little fasting flu, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. And your sources were very clear that, like, if you're having those symptoms and they're really bad or they just don't go away, listen to your body, talk to your doctor. And they also said that there are certain people who should probably avoid fasting altogether, like if they have certain health conditions. Diabetes was one they mentioned. Or obviously, if someone's pregnant or breastfeeding, important to work with your doctor on this, not just like go it alone.
All right, safety first.
Yeah.
Always good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so say someone's got the green light, health-wise. What's the key to making this whole intermittent fasting thing, actually sustainable? Because let's be honest, a lot of diets and like lifestyle changes, they sound good in theory, but then they're so restrictive, people just give up.
You're telling me. But that's actually what's so cool about the real-world examples in your research. Intermittent fasting, it's really flexible. There are stories of people who've made it work in such different ways.
Okay, give me some examples. How are people actually fitting this into their lives?
So some people, they sync it up with their natural energy levels, like early birds, they might eat dinner earlier, and then, night owls, they might have a later eating window. Others, they plan it around their social life, so like maybe they have bigger meals with friends on the weekends, but then keep things more structured during the week.
So finding what works for you, not trying to fit yourself into some rigid box.
Exactly. And a lot of people found that combining intermittent fasting with other healthy habits, it made it easier to stick with. Like some of your sources talked about mindfulness practices, like meditation.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see how that would be helpful. Being more aware of your hunger cues, like we were saying, knowing if you're actually hungry versus just, wanting to snack out of habit.
Exactly. And then that mental clarity and focus that a lot of people experience during a fast, it can be even stronger with mindfulness practices. Some people even found it like boosted their creativity.
No kidding.
Yeah, and on the physical side, like we talked about before, combining fasting with exercise, that can be a really powerful combo.
Right, like their bodies were primed for those workouts, burning more fat.
Yeah. And your sources had stories of people saying that their energy levels during those fasted workouts was through the roof, like they'd broken through some kind of plateau.
I love that. Okay, so we've got flexibility, we've got mindfulness, the option to exercise. Anything else that can help make this whole thing feel less intimidating, more, I don't know, doable?
Community. It might sound weird because obviously when you're actually fasting, you're doing it on your own, but a lot of your sources talked about how important it is to connect with other people who get it.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Sharing tips, recipes, or just like you said, venting about those tough days.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference knowing you're not alone. And that was a big theme throughout all the stuff you sent, this idea of support, whether it's friends, family, online groups, or working with a healthcare professional.
It really all comes back to that holistic approach, doesn't it? It's not just about the food. It's about everything else we're doing to support our well-being.
100%. And I think what's really exciting is that your sources, they suggest that this whole intermittent fasting thing, it might be more than just a trend. It could be the start of a whole new way of thinking about our health, about longevity.
Now, that is a thought to chew on. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listener to take away from all of this?
That intermittent fasting, if you approach it thoughtfully, if you really pay attention to what your body needs, it can be a really powerful tool for improving your health now and maybe even helping you live longer. It's about tuning into your own body's wisdom, working with it and supporting it in all the ways.
Beautifully said. So to our listeners, if you're curious about intermittent fasting, dive in. Experiment, be mindful, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. Listen to your body, figure out what works for you, and remember, you got this.
And who knows, you might just uncover a whole new level of energy, a whole new you.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into intermittent fasting. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and those bodies thriving.